page 4. And I think that the applicant had understood what I said, but it wasn't, the barrier should extend around all the way around the dumpster. It should stay all the way around the depressed area in front of the dumpster.
So that's the third paragraph on the bottom.
Yeah.
The barrier should extend, can you repeat that one more time?
The barrier should extend all the way around the depressed area in front of the dumpster.
Okay. Any other corrections?
No, but I have a comment.
Go ahead, Steve.
Page 7 and, no, page 11 and page 8. Notice for the new business subdivision plans regarding the State Street
Yep.
application. What was have been a 35-minute discussion amongst the board and the applicant. We got the minutes, just a paragraph and a half, let's say. And I think we discussed, and I don't know how the board feels about this, but we discussed a number of important issues. And I wish there was some more substance in this recorded minutes, you know, at least the printed minutes, which are what people will refer to should there be an issue, most likely. So, you know, we talked about things like open space, the amount of asphalt out there, issues with the traffic, which I thought were pretty important to
Okay.
have had a little bit
That's
more.
for new business subdivision 3, number 3,
I think it's number 4.
or number 4?
Yeah,
Number
4.
Number 4, okay. Oh, State Street, okay. All right, so do you wanna, maybe we should make a motion to, have Ed's amendment and have him take another look at that transcript and add some more detail to, new business subdivision plan number 4, and then resubmit. Someone wanna
Yes.
make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
All right, that motion by Mr. Rapucci, second by Mr. Robbins. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Same.
So there's 2 abstentions. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Farley. Okay. All right, so we won't sign off on those tonight. Okay, communications?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of Planning Board. You have one item in your packet that you didn't receive. It pertains to case number 3, which is the New Hampshire Rescue Mission. And it's with concerns, an email we received today. So you should review that when that item comes up on your agenda. It's case number 3. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Report of chairman, committee, and liaison. Ed?
I have one. It was in the form, we didn't have the HDC did not have a meeting, but I got a communications from that 59 Concord Ave was having some work done outside of their outside of the building, outside of their scope of work, and so there was a stop work order. Just a notification to all the members of HDC.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, I'm now gonna go ahead and read the procedure of the meeting. So the procedure of the meeting and the hearings will be as follows. After legal notice of conditional special use permit, site plan or subdivision is read by myself, the board will determine if the application is first ready for us to take, is complete and ready for us to take jurisdiction. If it is, then we'll move into the public hearing, and we'll begin at that time. The applicant or representative will be given time to present an overview and description of the project. They'll speak to whether or not they agree with the recommended staff stipulations, and the board will have an opportunity to ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant and staff. The chair will then, or myself, I will ask for testimony from the audience. First, I'm going to ask for anybody wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan. You can come forward to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, and this will be your time to go ahead and express any concerns or questions you may have regarding the plan. Next, I'll ask if there's anybody in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the plan. Following that, the board will then ask any relevant follow-up questions of the applicant. The applicant will be given the opportunity to come back up for a rebuttal period in which they can speak to any of the concerns raised by the public testimony. If we need one more clarification from the public, what I'll ask is that you folks get together and you have one speaker basically come forward for all of you. And you can speak to any additional concerns. The applicant will be able to come back and talk with that. After this is completed, the public hearing will end. The board will resume what we call a public meeting. We'll go ahead and deliberate and vote on the application in front of us. I'd ask that both sides keep their remarks to the subject at hand, not repeat things that have already been said. We want to be fair to everyone, make the best possible decision based on the testimony and considering all of our applicable approval criteria established in the National Revised Ordinances for these conditional special use permits or site plans or subdivision plans. I thank everybody for their time and their courteous attention. If you do have a cell phone, if you could silence it at this time as well. Okay. So, old business conditional special use permits, there are none. Old business subdivision plans, there are none. Old business site plan, case number 1, Janice M. and James R. French owners, McDonald's application and acceptance of proposed site plan amendment to NR 1893 to remove the existing drive-through and construct a proposed side-by-side drive-through and modify the existing parking layout. This property is located at 3 Northeastern Boulevard. So this item was tabled from our last meeting. So in order to discuss this any further, I'd need a motion to pull it off the table and bring it back into the hearing.
I make a motion that we take it off the table.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Rapucci for that, with a second by Mr. Robbins. Any discussion? Mr. Peterson?
No discussion.
Okay. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Okay, is someone here from the applicant? Yeah.
Hello, for the record, my name is Brandon Barry. I'm here with Bowler Engineering. Our address is 352 Turnpike Road in Southborough, Massachusetts. We were just before you a couple weeks ago, and I believe the board provided pretty clear direction on what they were looking to see in our revised plan. I think that we've accommodated your request, so I'll try and be brief in my discussion here tonight. At our last hearing, there was some discussion relative to the drive-through improvements we were proposing and concerns relative to drive-through stacking, blocking parking at the building. And the board, through their discussion, had requested that we remove the parking at the building, put back in the second drive-through lane, so we would have increased stacking and increased drive-through capacity. And then they had also made mention of a parking waiver if necessary. In response to those changes, we have relocated all the parking spaces that were up against the eastern side of the building. We have moved 6 spaces to the rear of the site and our 2 ADA spaces to the front of the site at the board's request. This has made it so our drive-through queuing will not impact any spaces, regardless of how backed up it could get, depending on traffic at any given time. The addition of the 6 spaces, not the 4 that we originally had, was to balance our parking out, so we are still at the 42 required spaces and do not require any waivers. We've added back in the second drive-through lane, so we've increased the stacking. There was a question on showing the cars from the pickup window to Northeast Boulevard, so we have done that as well. And for reference, that provides an additional 25, or we have 25 total stacking spaces on the site, which is far more than we anticipate needing, even during our peak rush lunch hours. Even though we've relocated those spaces into some of the green area we are providing along the Eastern Boulevard, increased landscaping along the building where the spaces were have balanced out the change, so we're still around about 5,000 square feet of impervious area. And as we've stated in the past, we believe that's a huge improvement. I believe that covers most of the board's concerns, and we've added those to our plan, and so we welcome any questions or comments you may have at this time.
Okay, I also noticed you got some notes to reconstruct the sort of guardrail around the depressed area by the dumpster.
We added notes to the plans for clarity, and we had also added one for the ADA push button at the door, that it was also a question from the board as well.
Okay. All right, thanks. Any questions, Mr. Rapucci?
Just a quick one. The pull-in on from Northeastern Boulevard's now where it actually kind of turns around a little bit, and that's not like that now, right? That's designed so that people won't be tempted to take a right out of that entrance? Is that the idea?
Yep, so as I zoom in here, you can see the red lines here are the existing conditions. So off Northeastern
Right.
Boulevard currently, you can come straight in, and even though this is pushing traffic up to the left here,
Right.
Some board members had said they saw people taking a right turn. So as we were reconfiguring this layout, we did try and add a little bit more physical barrier to really discourage that, 90 or hairpin turn to go the wrong way out Northeast.
Thank you. That looks good.
And that's signed as well right there?
So we do have, they're kind of hidden in my grass and mulch here, but we will have 2 new signs along with the pavement striping that will be stop and do not enter signs. And let me just double check if we have one. And that's what we have for signage in that area there.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Robbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Barry, thank you very much. This is, appreciate the fact that you and your company have worked to address a lot of the concerns that have been spoken about here. Just a couple of questions. I'm looking at the Land Use Code, City of Nashua, Chapter 190-41, drive-through or drive-in uses. And there appears to be a requirement that when there are 2 stacking lanes, drive-through lanes, the stacking distance has to be at least 140 feet. I wonder if you could tell me what the stacking distance is up from the street to the ordering.
So we have 223 feet through this main lane that you're seeing here where we have most of the cars stacked through the secondary lane. And then this interior lane here provides another 135. We're not going all the way back to the street on the second one, just because there's not really the 2 stacking. So we have 135 in the interior lane and then 223 in the exterior lane, so we have about 358 total feet of stacking. And like I said, that comes out to about 25 cars.
Wonderful.
That's just to the ordering point?
That's, so the feet distances I gave you were just to the ordering points. And then, so from our interior lane here, we have 100 feet to the pickup window, and then another 40 or 55 feet to the payment window, and then it would probably have another 60 feet here with the 3 cars around the outside. So that 550 number plus about another 180, 160 or so feet.
Okay, thanks.
There is a stipulation which says that stacking lanes shall not cross pedestrian access ways. For purposes of this subsection, a pedestrian access way means a sidewalk or other passageway designed to provide access for pedestrians from parking areas or the public right-of-way. Does that occur on the plan?
Looking at what we're showing here, we're showing stacking capacity per the bylaw all the way out to Northeast Boulevard. As we've said in the past, our anticipation for where stacking will occur during peak hours is really up to where this crosswalk would be. So how we anticipate the drive-through functioning, this yellow car where I'm hovering over is about as far back as we would expect it to go in both lanes. So I would say how we anticipate this working, no, we will not have queuing blocking those, the access.
So the stacking lanes, in your opinion, the stacking lanes would not block the, would not cross the pedestrian access way?
Not how we anticipate the drive-through to work, no.
Well,
But per the definition and the distance we have to use for stacking.
okay, so,
And that is an existing condition on the site as well.
all right. Just so that I'm clear on on one hand, you're saying that you have all of this distance for stacking.
Yep.
And then on the other hand, you're saying that, well, the stacking really begins up here so that the pedestrian access way does not cross the stacking lanes. And I guess
So per the definition from the bylaw, stacking really starts at the entrance to the site. How we've seen these drive-throughs work at the numerous locations, and how I believe some of the board members have observed them working even here in the city, with the 2 order points, it really facilitates moving cars very quickly through the ordering process and gets them to the picking up of their food. So with these 2 order points, we can have multiple cars placing orders at simultaneous times, and given how quickly they can take orders and then move them through, rarely do these drive-throughs stack based where what we would call the real drive-through entrance here. So the intent of this drive-through is really to remove all of this stacking. We're showing it to, per the request of the board and how the bylaw defines it, but how these drive-throughs work in practice is it really keeps all of our stacking from the order point to the windows, and the kitchen becomes kind of the critical path here, whereas under existing conditions, you get a car that has 4 or 5 people in it with unique orders, they're gonna sit there and then cars will just back up behind them. Whereas in this configuration, if this red car is ordering 5, 6 different meals, cars in the secondary lane can just go through and grab fries, coffees, or something quick, and that lane will continue to move freely. And that's really the intent of this drive-through configuration they're implementing, is to stop the stacking from the entrance to the drive-through and move it from the order to the pickup point. And that's what we see, how we see these function.
okay, I appreciate that, and I guess I'm still hung up on using 2 different definitions of stacking and stacking distance, but set that aside for just a second. Excuse me for just a moment here, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Well, I'll pass for the moment, if I may.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions,
Yeah.
Mr. Duke?
Yeah, just a quick question. If you look closer on the screen to where you have the escape lane,
Back here?
yeah, our plan shows a heavy line, and I'm hoping that's just paint.
That's the standard for McDonald's drive-through is to stripe that 6 inches, so we show it thicker. So nothing outside of these green areas, all of this pavement striping here is just striping. There will be no physical barriers.
All right. Now, you had it in the plan the last time, 2 weeks ago. That little angle line, also paint. What's the purpose of that, between the yellow car and the red car? Go back a bit?
Right here?
No,
Oh, here?
right, yeah.
That line's painted on there, that's what McDonald's calls the merge point. So that line is set up to kind of show the 2 cars, if 2 cars happen to get to that point at the same time, that's where they should be merging back together. So it constitute kind of this is where you'd be looking to merge. So it's a indication for cars that somebody else could be coming, more so than just looking at them. But with how they take the orders, they typically will move one car and then the other, just based off how their systems work. So it's more just in unique situations, but it's really
So
just
you
to
do
show
it-
where things merge.
You do it with paint, you don't do it with a sign, you do it with paint.
Yep.
Okay,
Mhm.
so that's the standard, thank you.
Other questions for the applicant, Mr. Weber?
Just one. Down at the bottom area where you have the 2 signs in between where where you have no right turn signs, and right in the middle of that, I discussed maybe having a arrow pointing, coming out of that it's only gonna be a left turn. Did you see that necessary or not with your signs?
We typically will use the signage, but if it's something you would like, we would welcome that as a condition, and we'll get that added on for extra clarity.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Mr. Robbins, you got any?
No,
anything else?
I'll pass. Thank you
Good.
very much, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Any questions for staff? No? Okay. Thanks. At this point in time, I'd like to see if there's anybody in the audience wishing to speak in concern of the plan. Seeing none, anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Any final questions for the applicant or staff before I close the hearing? No? Okay. At this point, I'm going to close the hearing and move into the public meeting. All right, so we've got the plan before us. We've seen this one a few times now. I think, looks like we've addressed some stacking concerns. Mr. Robbins, do you have any discussion points? You're concerned about the walking across, I guess, of the,
Well, I'd like to commend Mr. Barry, and again, the really, some of the concerns that I had voiced are, I think, substantially addressed in this. I'm not, still not happy with the fact that there is not an escape lane all the way around, but I think that this, you know, gets close enough so I can live with it. I do note that section 190-41 B specifically says the need for a bypass lane shall be determined at the time of the site plan review. If required, the bypass lane shall be at least 9 feet wide. So we do have the authority to make a determination, and it doesn't appear to limit our authority to do this.
sure,
And I just want to note that for future reference.
okay?
In the one issue I still have is, again, stacking lanes shall not cross pedestrian access ways. And this is a part of the criteria, the listing of items 1 through 19 on the blue sheet, site plan approval criteria. If you go to number 2, the site plan shall comply with all applicable requirements of parts 2 and 4 through 8 of this chapter. This is a part 2, in part 2 of this chapter. So this is something that links directly to site plan approval criteria. Stacking lanes shall not cross pedestrian access ways. For purposes of this subsection, a pedestrian access way means a sidewalk or other passageway designed to provide access for pedestrians from parking areas or the public right-of-way. Driveways leading to stacking lanes may cross a public sidewalk, but the area within the public right-of-way up to the edge of the sidewalk is not counted as part of the stacking lane distance. And again, the first part of this, I would interpret this to mean that the pedestrian access way coming from the northeast, just off the side, and actually entering the top of the picture where the yellow, partial yellow car is, followed by the red car. I would interpret that to mean, subject to information from anyone else, that definitely is a pedestrian access way. It is definitely crossing, it is, the stacking lane is definitely crossing that, and that by definition, if I'm reading all of this, it is a specific criteria for site plan denial. Now, one can make one's own decision on this. I offer that for consideration.
Mr. Apucci?
Just from my own perspective, I'm looking at this site differently than I would look at it if it was a proposed new site. If it was a new site, I think the issue Mr. Robbins is raising would be very valid in my mind. But I'm looking at it like that crossing is a pre-existing condition because it's that way now. And so, as the planning board, whatever it was 20 years ago, approved the site as it currently functions, I'm not sure that it would be the right thing to not look at that like it was approved to be that way at some point along the way. So I would just look at that a little bit differently from that point, just because it's been that way. So with it being redeveloped, I'm looking at things more like, is this an improvement over the way it has been? not so much is this the ideal way for it to be. And from that point of view, I don't know that we could reasonably expect, the way the parking is set up on this site, I don't think that they could reasonably do something that would keep people from having to walk across there. I mean, the only way they could possibly do it is to have them go all the way around the building, and even then, it seems like not practical. At some point, where people park their cars, they're gonna have to cross those stack lines, gonna have to do it. So, from that point of view, I'm kind of like, I think they did a great job of implementing the changes we asked. I think we asked a lot of them, and all the things that I heard us ask them, with this exception, they did. So I'm thinking that it's a good improvement to the site, and that's a pre-existing condition. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add that, a denial of the plan does not get rid of that condition. It actually maintains the condition. So there's no, when we can't get around that condition by denying the plan. It will still exist if we do that.
Well, if I may, I agree with
Yeah.
those comments. I agree that, and I think this is where you might be heading. There's, the two options are, don't do something or do this, and if you can't do this, the only other option is to not do anything. And the question is that fair and right and appropriate?
Right.
And I think that's a very, very legitimate question.
Okay. Mr. Barley.
First, I just want to mention that I was not here at the last meeting, but I was at the original hearing when we discussed this, and I did review the discussion from the last meeting. So I do feel like I'm up to speed in terms of what the board had discussed last time. And I would echo Mr. Rapucci's comments. It does appear, number one, that the applicant has really worked hard to address the comments that were raised, and I do think that the site is, materially improved by the changes here. And I guess another way to say it would be, from my perspective, is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. I mean, again, the crosswalk issue, it may not be the ideal location, but I don't know that there is one in the site. And we've seen this in other drive-through sites. There was one a couple of years ago where we had a similar issue where there was really no way around this scenario where you were gonna have to cross the drive-through lane to get to the building. And I think they've done the best job here they can with the existing conditions.
Anybody else? Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. On my last comment to the applicant, I would not put that as a stipulation, the arrow. I believe that they know what's best. It's just a comment that I wanted to make, so I wouldn't put any stipulation as to adding the arrow needs to be in there. It's just, they know what they want to do best. So, that was it.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Duker?
My only comment about the location of the crosswalk, I think it's probably the best location on the site in terms of where would you expect a car traveling at a higher speed? It's certainly not there, because whether it's a car picking up at the window and leaving, they're leaving from stopping, so they're pulling out slowly. If it's a car that's just entering the site from Holiday Circle, they've traveled through the site so to the point and they're making a turn there. So I think they'll be traveling at a pretty slow speed. So I think it's probably the safest location for the crosswalk if you needed to have one.
I just want to add one thing. I agree, and I also believe there is plenty of sight line there also for that crosswalk. It's not like somebody's coming out of the drive-through and, they got to watch out for pedestrians. There's plenty of sight line there for the pedestrians to see a car advancing or moving towards them, so they can, I believe that they can cross safely, across that area.
Okay. Any other discussion? Somebody ready for a motion? Mr. Barley?
If you sufficiently discuss it, I would be prepared to make a motion.
Okay.
So I would make a motion to approve old business number 1, McDonald's Corporation Amendment to Site Plan NR 1893. Finding that the plan does meet the requirements outlined in Site Plan NRO Section 190-146D, with a total of 12 stipulations, and the first 6 of those are waiver requests. And all 6 of those will read that the waiver is granted, finding that the waiver will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation, and stipulations 7 through 12 will be as written in the staff report.
Okay, so we have that motion by Mr. Varley. Do we have a second for that? Second by Mr. Weber. Any further discussion?
Can I just look at this for 1 second, because I don't have my copy?
Sure.
So all of the stipulations, then, nothing by the change that they made, nothing has changed in the way this is? I didn't really scrutinize it. I just
No,
want to
I
make sure
looked
that
at
the
it.
changes
Yeah,
haven't.
I did just look through them again now,
Okay.
to make sure I don't, it might, as best as I could tell, there was
They're the
nothing
same.
that's changed here that would affect any of those. They're really about sort of what has to be on the plan and, you know, and sort of in the design and things of that nature.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Mr. Robbins? Anybody abstentions? No? Okay, motion passes.
6 to 1.
6-1, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Barry.
Thank you all.
Okay. So, old business site plan, case number 2, that particular case is tabled to an uncertain date. And then we've come up to new business, conditional special use permits, case number 3. That's Teen Challenge New England, Inc., owner, Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission applicant, application and acceptance of a proposed amendment to NR 1743 for a conditional use permit to allow emergency shelter. Property is located at 36 Toll Street. I think that's, okay. Can I have a motion whether this is ready for the board to take jurisdiction?
I'll make that motion.
So moved by Mr. Rapucci.
second.
Second by Mr. Varley. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion passes. Okay, applicant?
You have to plug in.
Oh, that's okay.
So, the Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission,
Could you
has-
just give your name
I'm
and
sorry, my name
address
is
for record? Thanks.
Rick Rudder, the Executive Director and Pastor of the Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission. My home address is 223A Pine Street here in Nashua.
Great, okay, thanks.
So the Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission has been involved in meeting the needs of the homeless and the hurting in Nashua for the last 15 years. I've been here for the last 5. One of the things that we noticed almost right away when I got here was that there's a shortage of beds for single women, especially in the winter, for women who are basically have no other place to go but to sleep on the streets or to find shelter in compromising situations. Unfortunately, our facility, because we want to be able to treat women with dignity and respect, we're not able to house women and men in the same facility. Our facility is just not big enough. It's not lined. It's not designed in a way that would enable us to be able to do that on Chestnut Street. And so for the last 3 years, we've been looking for a property. In the last 2 years, the coordinated entry hotline for the city of Nashua, the 800 homeless hotline, we've been a part of with Harbor Homes, the city with City Welfare, the Front Door Agency, Marguerite's Place. That hotline has received over 800 calls. And of the 800 calls, 600 calls have come from female head of household. 300 of those have come from single women. So when we look at the situation, we're not in a position right now to be able to house women and children, but we can do something about single women. And so we've been looking for a property. That's where we came across the 36 Toll Street property. We actually looked at this property over a year ago, came back and revisited it just recently. Our desire is to be able to go in initially, outfit it, sprinkle the whole building, and then be able to construct the upstairs into have 2 bedrooms for handicap individuals, ADA accessible rooms, and then have dorm living for the rest of the women. We would be able to house somewhere between 16 and 20 women in the upstairs of the facility. There would be a large dining room / classroom space. All of the entries would be secure. There would be a waiting area, but there would be no way to access the shelter unless you were admitted by staff. The downstairs, we would renovate later as we see the need, and as the need would increase, we would begin the process of renovating downstairs, which would enable us, from initial estimates, to be able to house anywhere between 40 and 48 women safely and securely in the facility. Now, I also recognize that that security is a two-way street, that it's not just keeping women safe and secure inside, but also we want to be good neighbors. We have a good neighbor policy on our facility at Chestnut Street. We make no decisions that are going to negatively impact not our ability to serve our community, but our ability to love our neighbors. And so everything that we do, I saw some of the concerns that were expressed in an email earlier. There's no waiting in line outside. We don't have anybody waiting in line outside of our facility now. We do intakes between the hours of 8:30 and 3:30, so people can come in anytime during the day, so that they can meet with staff. We can do an assessment. We can determine if we're the right space for them, or if we need to refer them someplace else. If there's a need, drug and alcohol, mental health, whatever the presenting factors are, how do we help them connect with those services right away? But because we're going to do intakes throughout the course of the day, there's not everybody lining up at 5:30 to try and get a bed. They'll already know that they have a bed waiting for them. We do breathalyzers every evening for everybody that comes into our men's shelter. We'll do the same thing here. We do random drug screens. When we have a suspicion, we do random drug screens. Sometimes I'll come in the morning and I'll just drug test everybody. But we do random drug screens because we want people to know that we're a safe place for people to lay their head down. We believe that just because somebody's homeless doesn't mean they shouldn't be treated with dignity and respect, and we want to provide a safe environment for them to be able to sleep and get on with the process of recovery and restoration in their life. I did see the one staff recommendation for dumpsters. I can tell you that our Chestnut Street property, our dumpsters are in the back. They are not up against anybody else's property, and they have lids on them. And we would definitely do the same thing for this property as well.
Okay. All right. Questions for the board, Mr. Rapucci?
So, the people who come between 8:30 and 3:30, what happens if somebody needs shelter off hours? Are they put off until the next morning?
So we're actually working with Harbor Homes and the Mobile Crisis Hotline, so that if anybody comes off hours, actually the Mobile Crisis Network is able to respond to those people. There's beds that they're going to be able to address that need when the shelters can't. So somebody shows up at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, we will be referring them to Mobile Crisis, having Mobile Crisis handle that
Okay.
situation.
So when you do random drug testing and breathalyzer testing, what do you do when someone tests positive and has been consuming alcohol? Is that person not allowed to stay there?
Everybody knows that when they come to the shelter, if they blow hot, so to speak, they're not going to be able to stay.
What's hot? What level?
Anything above zeros.
Anything?
Anything above zeros.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
And, you know, we've had people say, oh, well, it's, you know, my cigarettes, it's mouthwash, I just brushed my teeth, everything else. Fine, have a seat. We'll come back in 15 minutes and do it again. We're not trying to be hard about it.
No.
But the reality is, they know what the guidelines are before they get there. In those cases, if there's a place we can refer them to, that's what we're going to do.
You know, I'm asking you those questions just because I think if I lived next door to this house, my concern would be that people, I mean, I live in the inner part of Nashua, and quite often I see people just consuming alcohol right in public, on public streets, sitting out on the porch, consuming alcohol. And I would be concerned that those kind of things would be introduced to my neighborhood by this. So if I'm understanding you right, there's a zero tolerance for that, and anybody who's drinking at all is not allowed to stay there.
Correct.
And even if you have to have them leave right at that time.
Correct.
Excellent. Okay.
And if they don't leave, and if they don't move off, then we will call Nashua PD and have them escorted
Okay.
off.
And what about women that are in crisis? What about maybe people who have domestic violence issues going on? Or, I know that in some of these locations, it's very confidential where they are, and there's no way for other people to know that they're there. Is that this kind of place, or?
No, actually, we would work with Bridges and other domestic violence agencies to be able to place women in those situations, because they're equipped to deal with that population.
Sure.
And so that would be our first.
So this
recourse.
is a safe place for homeless people to be?
It's a safe place
That's
for
what it is.
home for women who find themselves without another place to go to stay.
And
Our
if the-
desire is to make it as safe as possible.
And if they have minors, they would go elsewhere?
And if there's children involved, then we would connect them with Harbor Homes. We would connect them with the soup kitchen that has shelter, that does have shelter for women and children.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Varley?
Just a quick question about a little bit more on the intake process. So I understand you said it's 8:30 to 3:30, and is it principally a referral system? So you mentioned the 1-800 number. Is it women who are calling that number and then they're referring them to come to you during those hours, or is it also, I mean, word of mouth where people hear about it and then they know that they can come there during those hours?
I would expect in the same way that we have men come to the 40 Chestnut Street facility, that it's probably 2/3 referral and 1/3 word of mouth. If the referrals are easy because they give us a chance to screen somebody before they even show up on the property. But that's probably about the ratio that we have right now.
Mr. Robin?
Thank you. Is there any length of time that someone can spend, or consecutive numbers of nights that someone can spend, or at the shelter, or do you envision that?
So our shelter is designed so that it's consecutive nights, 30 consecutive nights, but if you miss a night, then you've ended your stay. The men's shelter, we have a 60-day suspension policy. So if they come in and they go through 30 days, but they're not really working towards anything, they're not going to be able to come back to the shelter for 60 days. We'll do the same thing here. One of the reasons is because we want them to set goals from the intake on. How'd you get here? Where do you want to go? And how can we help you get there? That's kind of how we envision the program. That's what we're modeling. It's somewhat, there's going to be some differences because obviously men and women are different, but that's how we envision it. So it would be 30 consecutive nights, one night stays for 30 consecutive nights. And then at the end of that, we actually have two different programs at our current facility. One is a transitional work program, because 1/3 of the men that stay with us have a full-time job. They just can't afford permanent housing in Nashua. And so we work with them to try and help them pay off debt and save up money so that they can get into permanent housing. And then we also, as a church and Christian organization, we do have a Christian discipleship program. That's 9 months to a year where we work with men to help them address the root causes for their homelessness, as well as helping them develop a foundation for success in the future.
Well, thank you for explaining that, because I guess I didn't understand at the outset, and I was thinking of this as domicile only. but this is essentially domiciled, connected with program.
Yes.
And it's required that people make progress through the program to remain eligible.
Correct. Our desire is not to warehouse anybody. Our desire is to help bring about transformation in someone's life so that they can move on to, like I said, to establish a firm foundation to move on to the future. I've had one guy that just moved out of the mission last week. He left us with his bachelor's degree. We paid for his college. And he left with his bachelor's degree in addiction study, and now he's doing counseling for us with some of the men that come through our program. That's our desire to see for women as well as men.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Mr. Weber?
I want to thank you for your work. I worked on, years back, in construction. I actually got to work on the Long Island shelter in Boston. The first day was scary for me, but within a few hours, I was very happy to be there and to continue doing the work. And it was all volunteer work that the construction outfit actually paid my way, but they donated my time. And I don't know if you have that kind of a situation that you need to have done over at your place, but if you want to talk later, I can explain that, how that
Thank you
can
very
happen
much.
for you.
Thank you.
You do have full-time security.
We will have full-time security. We don't have full-time security over there yet.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
when the ladies are there?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
And mainly, I found it was for their protection.
correct.
Talking on the dumpsters, you mentioned that they would be closed dumpsters. It's required that they are enclosed within a fenced area,
Okay.
okay? When I was out there, there was a number of Planet Aid. What is that, is that something that you want to continue to have?
We
done?
will actually have those removed.
Okay.
We actually do, in our Chestnut Street facility, we have a gift center where we recycle clothing for people. And so we will take those donations, we will process them through Chestnut Street, we will distribute them to people in need in the community. We may work with the Toll Street Mission across the street as far as they already do some clothing and food distribution. So we'll partner with them to see how we can come alongside of them. But I really, the first rescue mission I worked in, I was in charge of the industrial area, which was, we're processing all the donations. And every Monday morning, we spent $500 to get rid of the stuff that people dumped on our property. We don't have any desire to do that. And I don't have any desire to pay trash bills like that. So we're going to do everything we can to discourage that. We receive donations at our current facility from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And we don't have anybody dumping on our property. So
Just to add,
what we would do.
one of the cleanest areas that I've seen, when it was, and this is years back, Long Island Shelter, what a clean place it was, very clean.
Well, anybody that's been in rescue ministry, I've been doing it for 25 years now. And so, you know, we've always want to be good neighbors because we know, that's, we really don't want people coming to the city complaining about what we're doing. We want to be a blessing and a benefit to the community.
Thank you.
Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah. Along the line, the question of staffing, first, I'm assuming there's no guests allowed there, so
No,
there'll be no guests allowed.
no guests.
So when people are there, they're
The
there.
only guests are the people that are spending the night.
Right. And when it comes to staffing, I think the application says there'd be 2 people there all the
A
time.
minimum of 2 people, 24/7.
Now, again, I'm asking this question because I anticipate we're going to be asked this question.
Sure.
What level of professionalism are those people? Are they employees? Are they certified in counseling or in managing this type of facility? Are they former guests that are volunteers? What's their level of
So
of
we will
expertise?
I anticipate having a mix of individuals that we will have, as we do at the Chestnut Street facility. We will have people that are trained. We will be pursuing having a LADAC counselor there for drug and alcohol counseling. We'll have peer support people there. We will have, we will also have, hopefully, we will have guests who have gone through, graduated, got the training necessary, and come back to serve. And we will have volunteers, because, you know, our budget's only so big. And so we need to be able to, also employ some volunteers in some of those roles as well. So I think it's going to be a mix of all of those things is what I would anticipate. But we will have a program coordinator for the women's shelter that is at least a master's level education as far as either social work or addictions to head up the program.
Thank you.
Mr. Varley?
Just sort of a follow-up in terms of what we've already talked about in terms of women who were either, you know, under the influence, suffer, you know, substance abuse issues or suffered domestic abuse issues. And you said, you know, this facility is not designed for that, it's not equipped to handle that. Do you have formal referral relationships, or do you have, you know, are there other facilities in the city where you would be able to refer them to or place them when that circumstance arises?
We have been a part of the Greater Nashua Continuum of Care, participating. I'm the vice chair, or the co-vice chair, whatever it is, of the GNCOC. So we have relationships with every homeless service provider in the city. We have relationships with Bridges and domestic violence services. And so being able to refer somebody to the place that they need to go is not an issue for us.
Okay, thank you.
The one thing I will say, there's one thing that we are looking at in the future when we expand to 48 beds, and that is we're going to have a couple beds set aside. We will be working with Real Life Giving, an organization that works with women coming out of trafficking situations. And so there's a lot of times when they're coming out of trafficking situations, they need a place to stay for 1 or 2 nights before they can get into something permanent. So we will have rooms set aside specifically for that purpose, and we'll have trauma specialists on hand to be able to work with them in that regard as well.
Okay, so similar question. So first, you mentioned 300 calls from single women. That must translate to a number of people that you're trying to address.
Sure.
What would that number be approximately?
Well, if it was 300 calls, and I don't have access to all the data to see how many of those were duplicates, but even 60% of them as single women. Each one of those 300 are single women. So if we say even 40% of those were duplicate calls, that's still 180.
So it's a large number.
A
And,
large number.
and you know, when you do the first phase and the second phase, you're going to address up to 40 to 48, you said. Who else would be providing this kind of service? Or is this the problem that's out there that's not being addressed?
Currently, it's a problem that is inadequately addressed. And while we would love to be able to have a 500-bed shelter, realistically, no, I don't want a 500-bed shelter. We may need that many, but we're not going to end the problem by ourselves. But we can at least make an impact in the problem, start to make an impact in the problem in the community.
So
If
If you're
we
using
had
a-
180 calls in 2 years, that doesn't mean that we had we had 180 people calling at the same time.
right.
So
So I got it. There's a large number of single women needed
Yes.
help. The two full-time employees, minimum. That's for when you do the upstairs and downstairs, or that's from the get-go?
from the beginning,
Okay. All right. Thank you.
as our numbers increase, we have to adjust up the number of staff that are on at any particular time. But from the beginning, we'll have 2 people on staff 24/7.
One more,
Mr. Weber?
just one more. On that 2 staffing, will one of those always be a certified person?
During the day, yes. Overnight, not sure.
The important time is during the day.
The reality is that most homeless people come to a shelter because they want a good night's sleep. They want some place where they can lay their head safely. and know that they're going to be able to sleep and get up in the morning and everything's, maybe everything isn't okay, but at least they had a good night's sleep and they got a shower and they were able to be treated with dignity. And so we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that that happens.
Also, is, the two people does not include your security person?
Probably overnight it would include the security person. I can't, if everybody's asleep, situation may change, it may tell us that we need to, but I can't see if everybody's asleep overnight that we need to have 3 or 4 staff.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant from the board? No? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I invite anybody who's wishing to speak in opposition or concern or have questions about the plan to come forward, state your name, address, and come on up. Yep.
Hi, my name is Denise Paul. I live on 4 Pearson Street. What else did you need to know?
That's good.
My property on that map is toward the back of the building, and it actually touches the building. And a lot of the questions that you all asked are pretty much the same questions I have, not just questions, concerns regarding the number of staffing, especially at night, because I'm not going to be able to sleep in my home knowing that there's 2 staff members there when that includes security. And let's face it, they're probably not all going to be sleeping. And, you can't really say for sure what may or may not go on. So I don't think 2 people is adequate for staffing. I really don't. Secondly, as far as the intake times, that is also a school route that children walk because buses cannot transport them on the small side streets. They can't get down the side streets. So children have to walk to school there. And that is coming home during those intake times. And also, in the morning, there could be people waiting before the doors open, which also affects them in the morning going to school. And some are not accompanied by parents that are walking. That is a concern of mine as a former teacher. We are concerned. I do think that we do need homeless shelters for all types of people, men, women, children. But I am concerned at what scenarios that brings to my neighborhood, being that it does touch my property. If someone does get turned away, where do they go? They're going to get angry, and I'm right next door. So what happens to me if there's no security? Those are our concerns, and our property value, certainly touching my property, it's going to decrease. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So, yeah, I'm very concerned.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan?
You've already said it.
My name is Daniel Paul, and I reside at 4 Pearson Street. That was my wife, actually, you're speaking with, who was speaking. I just wanted to elaborate on some of the concerns. It is a problem area, obviously. Most of you probably are familiar with some of the challenges in French Hill. Everything's very close together. There's always noise issues. And then, of course, people, traffic all times of the day and night. Me and my wife have had to call the cops on many, many occasions, even, just in the last week, because of noise issues, whether it be a drive-by or so forth. When we heard about this, we obviously didn't know what exactly was proposed for this project. So there was obviously a lot of anxiety. Are you dealing with, mostly drug dealers or, drug addicts, I should say, or people with alcohol problems or so forth? Or is it more of a mental issue, Having some of those things at least put into some clarity is a little better. My other concern is the current and future use of the building and the property. Whereas my property actually runs, a good portion of the length of the west side of the property. I currently have issues with traffic going, through that parking lot from Whitney Street to Toll Street and vice versa. People walking all times of the day and night through there, dogs, animal feces, trash, what. So I would be in favor, obviously, if this was going to be an improvement. By that, I would want, currently there's parking being subletted to other apartment buildings in this area. As a homeowner, I pay enough for mine. I shouldn't have to, go around my neighborhood and see cars parked on lawns and so forth, or, see abandoned vehicles sitting in a parking lot, against mine. And that's currently what I'm seeing. So I would want to see at least some structure put on the facility as far as security, whether it be cameras outside, to alleviate any troubles that might happen at night. At least there's some documentation. I know that having called the cops so many times, they don't get there too quick. Sometimes it's been as much as a half hour or more. And sometimes, if it's a noise complaint, we'll say, yeah, it's, such and such Whitney Street. Because I'm on Pearson Street and I can hear it 2 blocks away when they get really loud. So, we'll call them and then we'll have a cop who pretty much just drives down the road with his windows up. They're not going to hear too much. So having security, improvements to the facility, I think if some of those stipulations were put in place, I'd be more in favor of it. I would still worry about my values, of course, as well as, the additional traffic into the area, because you're now talking about adding a couple dozen to maybe several dozen people who would be transiting this area, this one location every day. So something to keep in mind. That's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or concern for the plan? Just come forward.
Jody Corbett, 51 Whitney Street. I feel actually a lot better. After coming in tonight, I was really, really nervous about the type of property. After listening to Rick, I think, I do feel better. I do think we have a problem. I think that I value what he does for the community, but I still have concerns. I have a 4-year-old, I'm sorry, 5, he just turned 5, and a 1-year-old that my front door faces this property. Before it was in the current owner's hand, we had a lot of people lining up for donations. Between the language and the cigarette smoke, it really impacted my quality of living, and I didn't have young children at that time. So I do have concerns about what this is going to mean for me. We already have a transient population over there. We have people who do not care about where they live. We have a lot of renters, trash, dog feces, as was already mentioned. Obviously, that's not going to be a problem with the shelter, but there's just a lot going on there, and I just feel like it adds another piece of what is already a challenging area. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan? Come on up.
How you doing? Brian Haley, 51 Whitney Street. Sort of echoing what my wife has said. My concern is not our kids' safety, but the amount of other individuals will be coming around. As she said, we have a lot of trash already going into we have a bodega across the street. And one of my questions actually for you is if you had talked to the mission that's across the street and if they were involved at all. Because I know that they obviously are, the mission across the street has, a soup kitchen. They come in like every Thursday, and there's a lot of, the homeless in the area that come for that. And I didn't know if that was someone that you had worked with or sought out in terms of trying to, I guess, companion, I guess would be the word.
We'll let you like respond when you come back up. We just can't go back.
But yeah,
Good
so
question.
that would be just another thought, like,
Okay.
was there any kind of thought process in that in terms of kind of the, but yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, Toll Street always seemed to get ripped up every year, and then they pave it, and then they rip it up again, and they pave it again. And I remember there was a police officer who was working duty that one day, and he said, "This is the neighborhood I want to, I'm looking to move to." And this was a couple of years ago, and I'm hoping that's still the neighborhood that someone wants to move to when we want to move, and we have that property value. Again, that's sort of stuck in my head that, someone said, "Hey, this is the neighborhood to move to," and I hope that's still the case.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan? No? Okay. Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Come on up.
Hi, my name is Hector Andujar. I'm Assistant Director of Teen Challenge New Hampshire, the current resident. I live at 218 Laurel Street in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I guess I just wanted to, as I sat there and listened, I guess I just wanted a chance to be heard a little bit too, and want to say thank you to Rick for what he does. I went to Teen Challenge, which is a nonprofit drug and alcohol treatment center. I went there because I was one of these people we're talking about, and really was throwing away everything I had in my life, and I was on a tailspin for like 25 years. I had a really bad childhood, and I allowed that to be an excuse for a lot of years. I came to Teen Challenge, turned my life around, and have been there for the last 4 years, studying to become a pastor, working full-time, raising my family, have my family involved in the ministry, and dealing with a lot of these issues that we're all concerned about, really. So just as somebody that came from that background, and then somebody that currently does what Rick does, and that's just lay down my life every day to serve God, it's not easy. And so finding people like him are very rare. So I just want to commend him and thank him for the work he's doing. The concerns that we hear are definitely valid and real. A couple things just came to mind. I visited a couple shelters, but when I was busy getting high and drinking, that was the last place I was going. I can't speak for everybody else. There are, I'm sure you're going to get some of those types that want to go sleep it off there, but most of the people that I found when I was going to shelter were people that were just at the end and really were looking to try to get a place to sleep and try to get their head together and figure out what to do. When Rick describes his program and the structure of it and the goals, and just knowing what he's done, being kind of traveling in the same circles, there's a big difference between just shacking them up and trying to get them moving towards a goal, and turning people away that aren't a good fit because they're drinking or getting higher. They don't want to move towards that goal. So there's a little bit of a difference there. You don't get as much of this, the angry, rebellious, crazy episodes when you have people that are showing up because they know that you're blessing them and you're helping them. Can't guarantee it won't happen, of course, who can? But you certainly get a lot less of it when you're that kind of environment, and that's what you're promoting and that's what you're living. The problem and the concerns that are voiced are concerns that are already happening, whether or not he goes in there and opens it up or not. I mean, we currently, one of the things we continue to do at that place that the previous owners did is the food pantry type thing, where we were collecting food from local grocery stores 3 days a week and distributing it in an organized fashion to homeless and needy people and residents in the community. And there's been some issues, but I mean, we've been there for a few years. I don't ever recall a time where we've had to call the cops or anything crazy happened. We set rules, we were structured, we were organized, and they knew they're coming there to get something. They need to be to hold themselves accountable. So it worked well for us. again, a lot of the issues and concerns, I mean, we're living, we see it, I heard you mention earlier, sir, that you're seeing people in your community just drinking out in the open and that kind of thing. We see it everywhere we go. And everybody wants to do something. Everybody wants there to be help, but nobody really wants it to be here, and I hear that. But I think that when you put up a place like that and you're helping people move away from where they are, you're going to see a lot more good than you are bad. And I think there's just something to be said for that. So again, I commend you. I thank you for what you're doing. I know what it's, I've only done it for 4 years, but I've laid down my life for what we do at Teen Challenge, and I can imagine 25 years what you've come up against, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak in favor of the plan? No? Okay. Yes, at this time, maybe if you, the applicant come back up. So just a reminder, a few of the things that were brought up, there's a couple of folks that were concerned about staffing. Maybe, again, it sounds like there might still be some concerns or confusion about the intake process and times. Noise was brought up. The walking through the parking lot, the condition of the existing lot, and then maybe your relationship to the mission next door.
So again, thank you for coming, and thank you for voicing your concerns. As I've said from the beginning, from the time I walked in here tonight, we want to be good neighbors.
Sir, you have to speak into the microphone. You have to
We-
address the
we-
chair,
You can take it
okay?
out if you want to.
You can pick it up, yeah. We can hear you.
Okay. We really do want to be good neighbors. We don't want to come in. We want to minimally impact the community and the things that we do. Staffing, we're looking at best practices. I was just with 300 other executive directors of rescue missions across the country. We're looking to be certified for everything that we do. And so staffing, we're going to do what's best for the community and what's best for the people that are staying there. If it means that we have to increase it as we're able, we're going to do that. But if we're able to, we're going to start with where we start, and then be able to evaluate it as we move along. What are the needs? Where do we have to adjust? If we have to adjust the intake policy because we're seeing people show up before 8:30 and it's impacting children's ability to go to school, then we'll adjust. I have 8 kids. I want my kids to be safe no matter where they go. And I want anybody that walks by our building to be safe. As far as the parking lot, that's one of the first things that we were going to address, is that we are not going to have, we're not going to rent the spaces out. We're going to secure the parking lot. And we're actually, one of the things we might have to come back here for is to move the fence from where it currently is out to the sidewalk, so that there's no coming by any side, any part of the building, but that it's all secure. We want to do that for the police department so that nobody's running through our property trying to avoid escape. We want to do it for our neighbors so that nobody's hanging out back there. But more importantly, I want to do it for the women that are staying there, because the women that are staying there need to be able to know that that the building is safe. And, we talked earlier about the only place anybody would be hanging out is if we put a couple picnic tables outside so that the women had a place, those that choose to have a place to go out and smoke cigarettes. Because we don't want them showing up on your steps smoking, right? If you go to our 40 Chestnut Street property, you won't see anybody in front because the guys know that there's a spot in the back. Okay, and that's what we do, because we want to be good neighbors, and we want to address, as much as we can, those concerns that you have. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about property values. Property values may not always hinge on the fact that there's a rescue mission there. They hinge on the economy and a lot of other factors as well. And so I feel you. I understand it as a property owner here in Nashua. I understand that concern. But there's really nothing that I can, other than trying to find someplace else and impacting somebody else's property values. There's really not anything that I can do in that regard, but I guarantee you that if you have a concern, if you see something going on, I've got a stack of cards in my hands. You email me my cell phone, my personal cell phone numbers on my cards. You're not going to get an answering machine. I will do everything I can to address any of your concerns as quickly as possible.
I have a question before I answer.
Yes.
Go ahead.
What are you doing with are you doing anything with the skin of the building, windows, or how it appears?
At this point, there wasn't anything that we needed to do. And so we're not doing anything with the exterior of the building at all. We will look, as I just mentioned, we will look at whether we need to move the fence out towards the sidewalk, because there's a couple doors. I guess the plan shows a loading dock that was put in the back there, which is, but there's no fence on that side, and I think that's where people are cutting through. So we want to make sure that we eliminate that.
The reason I'm asking is because of the windows that are there, they kind of, they don't even look like you can open them or shut them. They look like they're just, not boards up there, but they almost are that.
Yeah, they were, I don't know if they're fiberglass
Yeah.
or what was put up by the group that owned the building before Teen Challenge. Initially, in our initial renovations, we were not looking to address that. We may address it especially if we find out that our heating bills are extremely high, then we may go to replacing them. But it wasn't something that came back to us as a need, and so we haven't really looked at that for the initial fit out.
Okay.
Mr. Worley?
Just a follow-up in terms of the security concerns, which you've, I think, done a pretty good job addressing, but there was one question about whether you would have sort of some structural security elements like security cameras or anything like that. Will that be a
Yeah,
feature?
we've already gotten quotes for cameras inside and outside the building,
Okay.
all the way around the property. We have cameras at our current facility.
And that's 24/7?
24/7, monitored in a staff office with DVR recording. So there's been a couple times the police department has come and said, hey, can you tell us about this? And we've been able to go pull video and provide an ID for them that way.
Is
Mr.
the
Peterson?
external lighting at night always on, or is it like motion sensitive?
I do not know the answer to that question. I would,
No, it isn't, it's not on all the time, it's sporadic. I don't know if it's faulty or they just choose not to put it on.
Okay.
Some nights it is, some nights it's not.
we'll have the outside lit in the evening. Our current ones, we have motion lights in the back of our facility, and then we have a front light that's on all night long.
Okay. Mr. Weber?
Just so I give you an idea, it would, I don't know if you have it at yours, but LED would be nice, just so surrounding people, it's not shining in their rooms.
Sure. We're all about energy efficiency.
But also, so it's not, the lights are not shining out into your neighbor's windows and keeping them up.
Okay.
Just with regard to the intake times, so when you say you'll adjust, does that mean like if you start seeing people lining up earlier, you'll start earlier on the intake?
Yeah, if we see that people are starting to show up at 7 o'clock in the morning, then we'll do that. One of the reasons we don't anticipate that happening is that the Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission serves breakfast every morning at 7 o'clock, and the Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter serves breakfast during the week about 7:30. So most people at that time, they're going to be getting breakfast. They're not going to be looking to do an intake until after they got something to eat. If they're at our Chestnut Street facility for breakfast, excuse me, we can actually do the intake over there. We don't even have to take them over to the shelter till after the intake's done.
Okay. And then there was a question about your involvement with the mission next door.
Okay. So the gentleman, Oral, who is their youth pastor, actually lives right behind my house. And so we have a relationship with them. I've gone over and already begun to have conversations with them about how can we help them do what they do and not duplicate what they do. We had the Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter next door to us for the first 10 years that we were in 12 years that we were in operation, and basically we operated in a non-competitive way. When they were open, we were closed. When they were closed, we were open. And so we didn't try to duplicate the same services that they provided. We didn't move to some of the same things they do until they moved the other side of town. With Toll Street Mission across the street, if they're doing food pantry, I'm not looking to do a food pantry, but I'll have the women that are staying with us go over and volunteer and help them. The men that are in our mission volunteer at Christian Bible Church every Tuesday to help them with their food pantry. They volunteer at the New Hampshire Food Bank, helping with the Fresh Rescue program out there. And when we get the phone call, we'll go out and help somebody move. We really believe that everybody that comes in our door has value and has something to give back, and so we'll look for opportunities to work with them, not compete with them.
Mr. Dukran?
Thank you. Could you review some of the instances that you'll have the need to call the police, and how frequent you expect that to be?
I wish I had the exact numbers. I don't expect calls to the police department to be all that frequent. The majority of the reasons we call the police department right now have absolutely nothing to do with our shelter. The majority of the reasons why we call is because we also run a soup kitchen. We served 42,000 meals last year. We're the only place in Nashua besides Denny's that you can get a hot breakfast 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But the majority of the problems we have is somebody coming, showing up for lunch drunk or showing up for dinner on the weekends drunk, and we're trying to deal with that situation. Those are the majority of the calls that we have for the police. Our shelter, like I said, most of the people that are coming, reality is they just want to go to sleep. They just want someplace to lay their head down. And so that's not, as I said, occasionally you might get somebody who gets belligerent for whatever reason, doesn't like exactly where you put them in a bunk or whatever. And we try to deal with it as best we can. If we have to call the police, we will. But that's infrequently compared to the other. But I would say that it's safe to say that we don't call once a month, that it's less frequent than that, the number of calls to the police department.
Yeah, the person who wrote in, we got this tonight, an email talks about yelling and screaming with ex-husbands. That's probably a reason to call the police.
That would be a reason to call the police.
Would there be a reason to call other emergency services like ambulance?
Some of the population that we're dealing with, people have health issues. And so, yeah, there may be times where we have had somebody have a heart attack. We had somebody have a stroke. We need to call emergency services. We had somebody not on our property, but outside of our property, that we found laying in the street. Don't know what the circumstance was, but if it's a health-related issue, we'll call emergency services without a doubt.
But again,
we had somebody fall last week. Mary fell, and so we had to call him for that.
But that should be rare.
But that should be rare.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah, just not to belabor the intake times, but it just strikes me that many people will realize they need a place to stay after 3:30 in the afternoon. I'm not clear on why intake would stop at 3:30. Am I wrong about that? I mean, don't people realize they need a place to crash after that during a day?
Most of the time, most of the calls that come to the coordinated entry line, most of the calls that come to the rescue mission for shelter actually do happen from 7 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
It's not really a problem to me. I mean,
Right.
even if you adjust, like you said, you adjust, and if you have to, you'll adjust your times. I'm trying to get to that because I don't.
Well,
Do you want to? Is it a problem for you to have a restriction that controls those times specifically, or is that just informational?
That's one, that's informational. Two, the reason that we do it that way is because we know when the majority of the calls come in, and we want to be able to have a set time when everybody knows this is
Okay.
This is where you're sleeping. It's time for a shower. This is where you're sleeping for the night. And to be able to lock the building down.
So you might want to have to admit people later than 3:30, like you said, if the need arises.
If the need arises.
So that is something you would like us to consider, that you don't want a very strict restriction on that.
No, we're not going to put again,
Okay.
much in the same way we'll look at it in the morning, we'll look at it in the afternoon. The primary reason for it is our intake takes 45 minutes to an hour to process. And so we want to get to a point by dinner time where we know who's staying, they know who's staying, they know where they're staying, and we can provide dinner for them.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Peterson?
So are the dinners prepared on-site at this location or elsewhere?
We have a commercial kitchen in the 40 Chestnut Street facility, and so breakfast and dinner will be prepared there and transported over to serve the ladies.
Oh,
Lunch, we will transport them to our 40 Chestnut Street facility because we serve lunch to the community at that time.
thank you.
Other questions? No? Okay. If there is additional questions for those that are concerned, I would entertain at this time one person if you want to get together, or if you feel like it's been addressed at this point, you don't have to come up, so. Okay. No? Okay. Yeah.
Jody Corbett, 51 Whitney Street. I had one question. I'm not sure if you can answer that for me. Intake, the time, I know you gave the times, but do they stay there from that point on, or do they come back at a time later at night? Are they all going to be coming back at like 8 p.m., for example? That's all.
Thanks. Can you come back up?
Majority of them will be, when they do the intake, they'll be staying from the time they do the intake on for the rest of the day. Probably, we actually, we have an early check-in, so we would anticipate that anybody that's coming to stay the night. So if you check in on Monday and on Tuesday, you go out, you have some appointments that you need to take care of or whatever, you come back, they would need to be back at dinner time. So we can serve them dinner, do the breathalyzer, get everybody showered, and pretty much everything locked down. So it wouldn't be a situation where we would anticipate anybody coming at 8 o'clock at night to come back in.
Okay. Just one question, I just have what is sort of like the average length of stay? You said there's like 30-day maximum. What's the average?
It's hard it's really hard for me to give you a number for women, for what the average stay is. Most of the men that come in and check into the emergency shelter stay anywhere between 20 and 30 days. And then probably about 2/3 of those will either join our work program, because at some point in that 30 days they got a job, or they'll follow through on the Christian discipleship program. So right now we had 36 guys who stayed with us last night, but only 10 of them were in the emergency shelter.
Okay.
The rest were in one of our programs. So they're working towards goals. And
Yeah, so there's a lot of, there's a lot of the same people there actually
Right.
each day.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
One more question.
Mr. Peterson?
So does your facility have laundry so people can do their wash?
Yes, yes. Everything's, laundry's provided, meals are provided. We want to take care of the basic necessities of life.
Okay, any questions before I close the hearing? No questions for staff? Okay, thanks a lot, appreciate it. Okay, at this point, I'm going to close the public hearing and move into the public meeting here with the board. So, discussion, anybody? Start.
I'll start.
Mr. Pucci.
I obviously, this is a noble thing, and I support the principle of it, and I support this. I think I'll vote for this. However, I think that a critical part of why I support it is the presentation about the sobriety there and keeping any drug or alcohol use is being completely prohibited. So I would just, what I would be concerned about is not this this applicant using the property the way it is. I just would like our approval to be clear that it's based on the restrictions that he's presented. So, like, 5 years from now, if somebody wants to change the way the shelter works, if it isn't restricted to prevent anyone from, that's under the influence of anything being there, I would like that restriction to apply. I would like them not to be able to move in, our approval to be conditional on that condition, if that makes sense. So, because I think that would change the element of what is being introduced into the neighborhood completely. If they didn't have it's their strong position about that that makes me feel like that's granting a level of security to the neighborhood. And I think, just judging from the way people spoke that are here, I think they felt the same way. I think they looked at it more like, this is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. But if we had people who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol moving in there in a transient way, I think it would be bad. So if we can condition it that way, I would support it. And the only things on the approval criteria that I can see that might be relevant, I'd just like to stay on the record that that speaks to number 3, where will not materially endanger the public health or safety. I just want to say I think we considered that, and that's my consideration of that. And number 4, substantially devalue abutting properties. We had no testimony to that. Nobody came forward and said, having this shelter here will devalue property, and here's some kind of documented evidence of that. So, barring that, I wouldn't consider it to be a reason not to approve this. We don't have any information to the contrary, and I think in a lot of ways it probably they'll be a better neighbor than a lot of other possible neighbors. And so I think we've addressed those 2 things. Those are the only 2 things I can see on the criteria, from my point of view, that might have to be spoken to approve this. So that's where I am on it.
Anybody else? Mr. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with Mr. Pucci. I mean, I think, as you said, I mean, this obviously, it's a need, and they're fulfilling a really important need, but within a limited scope. And a scope that I think is, as you said, maybe much more, it raises fewer concerns with the neighbors than other uses would. And I also say, I'm really impressed with the applicant, and I believe him when he says he wants to be a good neighbor. They clearly, he's got a lot of experience, the 40 Chestnut Street facility. This is actually gonna be more limited than that, I think, and I think he's taken pains to really structure this and present it in a way that has taken into consideration the concerns of the neighbors, and obviously he's made a commitment to continue to address those concerns as they arise. So, and in terms of, I agree, the property value, I think it's easy to assume that a facility such as this is going to have a negative impact on property values. But I agree. I think we need to be careful not to jump to that conclusion. And again, I mean, one of the issues that was raised by both the neighbors was, the condition of the property and some of the issues that are associated with the property now. And it certainly seems like, at least from that perspective, this would represent an improvement. So I think all in all, I think that the applicant has done a really good job. But I'm also perfectly comfortable with your proposed stipulation that we say yes, because I agree with you. If we prove this as conditional use, that's not to say that somebody else couldn't use it for this, the same type of use, but in a different way. So I would be perfectly comfortable adding that sort of restriction.
Mr. Weber?
Just like to reiterate, and to help Jerry, I actually, like I had said before, I actually was working on the Long Island shelter, and I was really surprised at how much security, that there was a security there all the time. And not once did I ever hear, and I was there 3 months working on the shelter, on their administrative rooms and stuff that they needed there, and I was volunteering at the time. I got paid, but I was volunteered by a contractor at that time, and it was very professional, very clean, and not one instant did anyone ever come in there drunk, ever. They always were very happy, and they ate there, and I actually talked with the people that were actually in there many times, because they had work programs in the place. It was a pretty big place, and everything. These were just people that wanted to get their lives straightened out and work towards something, so this is the same thing happening.
Mr. Peterson?
I think many of the people in the neighborhood have described problems in that part of town that were there long before this shelter was proposed. And I think having the shelter there would give a lot of those clients or the women who go to the homeless shelter a path out of their problems, a path for them to improve their lives. So on balance, I think it's going to help society rather than drag it down.
Okay. Mr. Dukran?
Yeah, I just want to add, Mr. Chair, that the applicant, has presented, is very prepared to pursue this project, and we expect that it will be done just as well. But also that the folks from the neighborhood who spoke, I think they're very understanding as well, and I think the city should appreciate that. Something like this we have dealt with before. We have seen a lot of resistance, and we didn't see. We saw some concerns, but certainly not resistance. So I think that's appreciated.
Anybody else? All right. Hearing no more discussion topics, does anybody want to entertain a motion? Mr. Barley?
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
I would make a motion to approve new business number 3, conditional use permit. Owner Teen Challenge of New England, applicant Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission, proposed change of use to an emergency shelter for homeless women, with the finding that the plan does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-133F. That would include 2 stipulations. The first reading is written in the staff report, and the second reading that this approval would be subject to the restrictions on use that have been proposed by the current applicant regarding the policy of 0 tolerance for alcohol and substance abuse for residents. Is that?
I think that covers it. That's a good way to put it.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Varley to approve with 2 stipulations. One is in the staff report, second is presented by Mr. Barley. Do you have any second on it? Second by Mr. Weber. Any discussion? Mr. Dukran?
Was there any consideration to the times?
You know, that's a good question. I thought that the applicant wanted the flexibility to be able to adjust as the needs arose. And personally, I didn't have a problem with that, considering his approach to it, but maybe other people do.
I don't think you want to be, taking in people at midnight.
You know, my experience with places that handle people on an emergency basis is that sometimes that comes up. Like, I try to picture a circumstance where there's a person who meets the criteria for this shelter. That's why I kind of brought that up, because it strikes me like at nighttime would be the time that some people might need that. And if they fit the other criteria, personally, I wouldn't have a problem with the shelter accommodating them. And I don't think it would be an imposition to the neighborhood if it's, because that would be something that would be handled internal to the building, I would think. Somebody shows up there and they're handled inside, it's not like they're gonna be handled out on the street. But I wouldn't be opposed to listening to somebody's point of view that it was a concern. To me, it's not.
I'm just bringing it up because I thought that's what you're bringing up. I know you talked about.
Well, actually, I was trying to bring it up because I was a little confused when the times came up. I wasn't really clear on if that was a stipulation in the application or if that was just informational, that he was telling us how it works. I thought it was actually part of the application, but apparently there was only one stipulation listed and it didn't have anything to do with it.
Because you want to make sure that the facility is properly staffed to handle new entrants and all of that.
Yeah. I don't know, our applicant, appears to have a pretty significant amount of experience in operating these types of facilities, and I'm a little reticent to make judgment on how to operate this facility based on my experience versus theirs. Yeah,
I was only coming from the point of view of, say, the neighborhood,
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
already dealing with issues, and
Yeah.
there's an additional dimension
Yeah,
to add, so.
yeah. Mr.
Well,
Robbins?
I would agree with you, Mr. Chairman, and my only thought is that if someone were to show up at 10 o'clock, it would probably be in the neighborhood's best interest for them, for the door to open and for them to go inside than for them to be left outside. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't think it is going to happen. And I would agree with you that it's probably best to leave it to somebody who does this professionally than to try to, fit my conception and realize that I don't know
Yep.
what's going on. So I would be opposed to putting any kind of limitation like
Okay.
that.
Exactly.
Any other discussion? I'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Motion passes. Thanks. All right, so that's, we're moving on to new business.
I think we have to ask for that like 3 o'clock.
This would be new business, conditional special use permit number 4, 131 Burke Street LLC, owner and application, acceptance of proposed site plan amendment to NR 1658 for conditional use permit to allow for manufacturing use at properties located at 131 Burke Street. And we're gonna hear this at the same time with new business site plan, case number 5, same applicant, same location, so.
So moved.
So we need, I need 2 motions here, though, one for the conditional special use permit, that application is ready for the board to take jurisdiction.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Weber, second. Second by Mr. Varley. All those in favor?
Aye.
And then regarding new business site plan, case number 5,
So moved.
we have a motion to take jurisdiction. Second? Second by Mr. Rapucci. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks, you're up.
That was maybe surprised.
Members of the board, my name is Patrick Colburn, and I'm a project manager with the firm Keach Nordstrom Associates. I'm here representing 131 Burke Street LLC. They're the property owners and applicants in this case, and I'm joined tonight by Ryan Fillion. He's one of the members of that LLC. This project probably looks very familiar to at least some of you. This project came before you in September of last year. This is the site of the old Ingersoll Rand. It's industrial in nature. and is part of a small private industrial park. There are 3 other lots that are part of the same industrial development. This is the only one of those 4 owned by the applicants. And Paul Chisholm, previously from our office, was here in September of last year, coming forward with a plan to convert the entire site from industrial over to self-storage. You'll recall that he proposed, and you folks approved, 8 standalone self-storage buildings, exterior to the main structure, and then also conversion of the main industrial building into nearly 60,000 square feet of climate-controlled self-storage. As I say, that project was approved by this board, and I was out there this evening, and note that all 8 of the proposed exterior self-storage buildings are up. The site has been brought to binder pavement grade, and all the drainage structures appear to be in and have been raised, ready to receive wearing course pavement. So construction-wise, they're nearly finished. That approval from September of 17 was very descriptive in that it allowed only warehouse storage and mini storage. The warehouse storage component is just a small piece, 3,800 square feet of the existing building, where a local mason uses a portion of the building for warehouse storage. New England Brickmasters has long occupied a piece of that building for storage of material and equipment. That remained with the previous approval. The balance of the property converted over to self-storage, no longer allowing for the use of the site for any industrial type use. And that wasn't the intent of the applicant. When they came forward, they thought that what they were going to be allowed to do is maintain use of the existing building in the short term, be able to construct the exterior mini storage buildings, get them occupied, all the while enjoying rent roll from existing tenants. Lewis and Clark was the tenant that was in there. And then upon completion of the Lewis and Clark lease, convert the interior space over to the climate-controlled space. During the approval process, Lewis and Clark decided to relocate. So they broke the existing lease and they're gone. The applicants, I guess, not knowing better, endeavored to find replacement tenants, and they found one of like use, that is Granite State Hydraulics, and then sought another one. And the other proposed tenant for the industrial space is a custom precaster. And what I mean by that is, some folks in the audience asked me before the meeting started, and I used the detail of some of the architecture in here. If the city wanted to replicate this old woodwork detail, the proposed tenant could create a custom form and replicate that with modern day materials. Polyethylene or polyurethane, or like a styrofoam polyfoam. So that particular tenant requires fit-up, and when the applicants went to City Hall to get permits to do the interior fit-up, they were told that their existing site plan approval for mini storage no longer allowed for the industrial use. So they came back to our office and explained the situation, and now we're here tonight to ask for your consideration, basically to amend the September 2017 site plan approval to allow them to maintain use of the existing building for industrial purpose, obviously with the intent of converting it to climate-controlled self-storage in the future. One of those tenants has a 3-year lease. The other proposed to have a 5-year lease. As those expire, the intent would be to go in and renovate those now vacant spaces to be that climate-controlled space. I submitted a formal application for your consideration, and that included a couple of attachments at the request of staff. First, we understood that the manufacturing use in this particular zone, the general industrial zone, requires a conditional use permit So I requested that for it's called former beyond use. That's the manufacturing use proposed within the building. And with that, I provided a description from those particular tenants of their individual uses, so that you folks could gain an understanding of who they are and what they do. We also, at the request of staff, submitted MSDS sheets for everything that these folks use within the buildings, submitted that through the fire department. The amended site plan looks almost identical to the plan that you guys approved in 17. As I say, it's already built for the most part. The one change to note is a change to the fencing, and that is the security fence around the exterior self-storage units. You folks are familiar with seeing these mini storage sites surrounded with security fence, and you have a swipe card or a key fob to get into the secured area. That was always the intent and remains the intent, but we needed to be able to provide the industrial users access to the westerly end of the building, because the westerly end of the building is where you find the loading docks and the at-grade overhead access doors that those folks will rely upon. And so you'll see that we adjusted the security fence, ran that through the fire department's process, and that was approved by the fire marshal's office in its location as proposed. And then the other thing we did is we were getting ever so close to no longer requiring a waiver from the city's minimum parking requirements. Previously, with the self-storage use, believe it or not, there was a need per the code for 99 parking spaces, and you folks approved a waiver to allow 52 spaces on site. Even at 52 spaces, that's way more than a self-storage facility would ever need, because if any of you have ever rented in these places, you know that you park in front of your unit and you unload and reload your vehicle and leave. You don't go and park unless you're a first-time customer coming in to rent space. So the 52 parking space waiver where 99 is required was approved. Recalcing the parking requirements now with the mixed use on site, so the industrial use paired with the self-storage use. There's only a need per the code for 61 parking spaces. South of one of the buildings, the building to the far west, I was able to find room for 8 additional parking spaces with no additional asphalt paving required. If you look at aerial imagery of this site, you'll note that those 8 parking spaces have always existed there. It's just that the paint has worn off. So with this amended site plan, I propose to restripe those existing parking spaces, which gets the site up to 60, where only 61 are required. So I do continue to request your consideration of that amended waiver, but wanted to point out to you that we're an awful lot closer than we were last year to what is required by code. All of our existing state permits, which include alteration of terrain and shoreland through the DES, remain valid. As I say, the site is nearly complete, and there are no revisions proposed to impervious surface area, to stormwater accommodations. Everything that you folks reviewed and approved in 2017 remains. And so, yeah, on the right-hand side up there, you'll see the floor plan layout, because we wanted to be able to show you how the building is proposed to be utilized. This, of course, is the existing industrial building on site. And you can see on the far right side, that represents east on the picture. That is the main entrance to the building, and it's adjacent to the main parking facility on site, where most of the parking is available, as well as the ADA accessible parking spaces. And so in pink, you can see the main entrance, and just off to the right as you come through the front doors is the rental desk for the mini storage. And then if you continue down the pink corridor, on your left you have the common bathroom facilities. And then on the right-hand side is the main entrance to the Granite State Hydraulics industrial use, and on the left being the main entrance to straight in, the main entrance to the former Beyond, the custom precaster use. And then down there in green is the 3,800 square feet of warehouse storage for the long-term tenant that was there in 2017 when you saw this the first time. On the westerly side of the building, as I mentioned, that's all your overhead garage doors and loading dock spaces for the industrial tenants. The 8 spaces that we found room to paint over on that westerly side could potentially be used by the employees for either one of those industrial uses. I believe the write-ups from those particular firms speak to at the precaster, somewhere between 12 and 16 employees, and then at the Granite State Hydraulics, where they machine and retool hydraulic cylinders, something on the order of 5 or 6 employees. So you're not talking a huge number of people on this site. Neither one of those are retail operations, so visitor type traffic is nearly non-existent. With the exception of the self-storage use, which you guys have already heard much about. Let's see. I submitted, obviously, the request for conditional use permit. You folks have that. I don't suppose you want me to read it into the record, but I'm happy to if you want, if that's the board's pleasure. Otherwise, I think that pretty well wraps up why we're here tonight. Again, really nothing to do engineering-wise. For me, this was all about the use and the permitted uses on the property. Thanks very much.
Mr. Varley?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, so when Lewis and Clark was there, were they a manufacturing use?
They were a machinery reseller, and maybe Ryan knows better than I, but it's my understanding that they would take in used equipment, like, it was office equipment, wasn't it? Like, large format copiers and such, and refit them, refurbish, and then resell. So it was, machining and retooling similar to that Granite State Hydraulics use.
Okay,
just with different equipment.
Yeah, because I thought you had said or suggested that per the approval last time, that something about that approval had revoked their, the ability to have a manufacturing use. But it sounds like, no, there was no manufacturing use there, so they would have needed the conditional use permit. It wasn't something that was part of the prior approval.
That's right. So the prior approval was for nothing more than mini storage and climate-controlled mini storage.
Right.
And the warehouse storage for New England Brickmaster.
Right.
So it was
But
all
there
about
yeah,
storage.
The conditional use hadn't been asked for at that time.
That's right.
Right.
And
So
now,
that's-
the use for the Lewis and Clark facility is a permitted use. So, machine shop is an allowed use in this zone. It's the manufacturing use, so the precaster, the former Beyond use, that's what requires the conditional use permit.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rabucci?
When was the Lewis and Clark lease supposed to expire?
I don't know the answer to that. No, Brian?
Ryan Fillion of 131 Burke LLC. We had extended that lease for 2 more years prior to getting approval. So
2019?
2019.
Okay. This is, I'm not asking pointed questions. This is something I'm not too knowledgeable about, so I'm just trying to get my hands around exactly why there would be an issue with this. So was the initial plan that in 2019 you would then go ahead and convert that building to storage?
We were hoping for it to be in phases. So we were to do the outside, and then as our tenants moved out and as we gained tenants and capacity, full in
As
our
it grew, you
self-storage,
would go
we would
ahead
then
and-
move in.
Okay.
And we were really hoping that the main building would fund this, pay the bills, and as they chose to, end their leases, or we chose not to renew them because we didn't sign leases with options. So we didn't give them the option to extend after the years of the terms like typical leases have. We had a vision of it being a little bit further, especially with Lewis and Clark. When we acquired the building from Brady Sullivan, Lewis and Clark was already in there. Atlantic Prefab was also already in there, and they were a manufacturing company, which I don't think Brady Sullivan asked for approval to have them in there. So when I bought the building, we, I guess, wrongly assumed that we were okay to kind of move forward in that matter.
I have a couple of questions for planning, but I don't have to tie you up with them. I was just trying to understand what got you to the point you were at. I think my other questions are more for the city than they are for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant? Mr. Weber?
Your new tenant, do you have, on your stormwater, it's something, inside the building, like the concrete, got spilt and it needed to be cleaned up? How would that be anywhere that it wouldn't get into your, with your stormwater, that would clean up and not let it go into stormwater?
Sure, so I asked that question of both users, and so they're not allowed to have floor drains inside the building that are connected to storm sewer, or to, and if they are in there, then they need to be connected to the sanitary sewer. I don't think there are any floor drains. The applicant confirms there are no floor drains. Both uses are completely within the walls of their facility. They're not exterior to the facility, where all of the stormwater considerations come into play. The materials that they use are materials that they contain within these molds, and if it was spilled on the floor, it would be picked up from the floor, probably when it hardens. For instance, in the precaster use. On the other side, you're dealing with like hydraulic fluids, and they have kits that they use for cleanup of spills in the event of a spill. So the stormwater improvements exterior to the building should not be affected by what's going on inside the building. When we brought this through the first time, when Paul brought this through the first time, we were disturbing enough land area to require that alteration of terrain permit. And so what was done, because this site was completely paved before we started, what we did is enhance the stormwater on site with a subsurface pond, and that pond treats and infiltrates stormwater, treated stormwater, for groundwater recharge, where that didn't exist previously.
Thank you.
So that all remains, it's built.
Mr. Duker?
Yeah, Mr. Colburn, along that line about the discharge from the manufacturing, I don't know if the facility has a sewer industrial user permit, but you would need to have one, at least consult with the city about that, and review your MSDS sheets?
Yes. Yeah, so we provided all of those MSDS sheets. I believe at this point it was the fire department that asked for them. So upon issuance of site plan approval and seeking, that certificate of occupancy, I believe that's when your sewer department would request that IDR if necessary.
Okay.
Industrial discharge review.
So we need to know that that's a step that needs to happen. Because I don't think you were involved in the previous approval.
I was not.
So there are some outstanding items that I learned from that approval. One of them being to locate the sewer connection for the building to the city system. There are no records that it is connected, and it's very likely that they may be just discharging to the nearby brook. So that's required. That was part of Engineer Walker's.
I remember I remember dye tests. I remember Paul talking about dye tests. Are you sure that wasn't done during that initial approval? Let me investigate for you. I'm not certain.
Okay, we should do that because according to the engineering office staff, that hasn't been done.
Okay.
And maybe it was done to the satisfaction of Engineer Walker, who's moved on, but it probably isn't recorded in the right place.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go follow up on that. The other thing, the retaining wall inside of the big wall near the roadway, that, according to the notes on the plan, the design was supposed to be submitted to the city engineering office.
And it was not, I take it?
And again, according to staff, They don't have a record of that being submitted.
Continental Paving was the site contractor, I believe, and so I will seek that from them. They should have that from the manufacturer.
Okay, that's good. The only other observation I made while I was out there is that the fence, I think it could be a steel fence, that sits upon that wall, it's damaged.
I think there was a section pulled for access, right? Is that what that is, or?
The worst part of the damage, there was an accident overnight. We had an ice storm one night, and at 3 in the morning, somebody slid through the stop sign and took that out. So in the process of us putting in the post now, because we have the binder installed, so the next step is for us to put the fence posts in, and part of our quote includes repairing all of the spaces in that fence that have been damaged over the years. So we kind of inherited what was there, and that will be repaired when the security fence is done for the main storage buildings.
I was just concerned that pedestrians could
Squeak their way in.
fall through.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we share that concern, so we're definitely going to take care of it prior to certificate of occupancy for the storage units themselves.
Yeah, maybe you want to do a temporary repair or something, like
It's happening as we speak.
caution.
So, the contractor's on site, he's getting started. I mean, we could certainly have him go there first, but we were just getting the pipes in, the main poles in, so Continental could keep the ball rolling.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Okay.
One more.
Mr. Weber?
When I was out there on site plan, I noticed that there was, I think, 3, maybe more, well monitors. Did you ever have them, who does the monitoring on those?
Oh, my gosh, was it GZA? Yep, GZA is the environmental consultant. Pardon? Go ahead.
There's a lot more than 3, but we're Ingersoll Rand is monitoring that through GZA for the life of, as long as Ingersoll Rand's going to be around, so.
Okay, I just want to know if it did happen, and thank you.
Yes, yep.
Any other questions? No? Okay.
Thanks, folks.
At this time, I'd ask, is anybody wishing to speak in concern or have questions about the plan? Please go ahead and come forward.
My name is Maurice LaLiberty, 104 Burke Street. I'm one of the abutters. I have a question about the entrance of any companies coming into the area, which means that I live on the pretty much in the middle of the project that they have, and I'm concerned on where they're going to put the entrance of this project and where they're going to put the exit for the companies to come in.
Okay.
And that's one of my concerns. And my concern was answered earlier about the traffic pattern that they're going to have for people coming in and coming out.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. All right. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan? Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Okay, applicant, maybe if you can respond to the questions of the abutter?
I think I
Alright.
can.
Yeah.
The first one regarding entrance and exit, when the gentleman speaks to the companies, I'm assuming he means the industrial users, so for deliveries and shipments to and from those tenant spaces. And that is set to occur right where it's always occurred, and that is off of Burke Street. So there are 2 ways into this site. The first is at the westerly end of the site, directly off of Burke Street. And that's where, we expect all of those deliveries and shipments based on how we organize the security fencing around the self-storage units. The second entrance to the site is by private drive on the east side. There's a private drive that comes in off of Burke Street, and you'll have 2 options from that entrance. You can either enter the parking lot which is outside the security fence, or if you're an existing tenant of the self-storage space, then right from that private drive, you can swipe your card and go through the security gate into the complex of storage units. That's the main in and out for existing tenants. There's an emergency gate that the fire department required on the west side of the storage units, but that is only for emergency purpose. And
That's within the site.
that is all within the site, yes, sir.
So essentially, the existing curb cuts they're not changing?
That is right, yeah, yeah. And then I think I also just described the traffic pattern of who's going to do what, depending on what you're there for.
Okay. Any questions on that, Mr. Duper?
I just want me to make a comment for you. We recognize your surprise that the last plan got that very large waiver on parking, and this time, you wrote that as well as you mentioned it. You actually made a good argument for why we gave that waiver last year in your discussion.
Yes.
So
It's
I
sort
don't
of
think it was a wrong decision.
Yeah, well, it's, okay, I'll leave it at that.
All right, any other questions for the applicant? No? Okay.
Thanks.
At this time, any other questions from the audience?
Maurice Liberty, 104 Brook Street. I have one other question about the companies coming in. What are their hours going to be? Are they going to be working 2 shifts, 1 shift, or 3 shifts? This is one of the questions that I have, because traffic will be still vulnerable.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, thanks. Okay, if the applicant could respond, shifts and,
The hours, they only work 1 shift, and their hours are, I'm not sure what time the earliest come in, but their hours have been 7 till 5. That's the way they've been working. It's similar to the last company that was there.
How about weekends?
They don't work on the,
Thank you.
not normally scheduled, and weekends happen, but they're not taking deliveries, as far as I know, certainly on the weekends. And the delivery traffic will be significantly less than the previous tenants that were there as well, so hopefully that does help out a little bit.
okay, all right, thanks. Any further questions from the applicant from the board? Any questions for staff before I close the hearing?
I think Mr. Rapucci had some.
You had some, right?
If I was understanding this right, it's just a change in use is why we're here. It's not that that staff has any concerns about this. It's just because it's a different use that isn't approved there, that's why it's coming to us.
Right, this use requires a conditional use permit, and
Gotcha,
that's why
right.
they're back here.
Yeah.
Okay,
And a few minor changes to the site as well.
sure, okay. That was the only, I'm a little clearer on that now. Actually, let me follow up on that a little bit. So when this got when we originally approved this, and it was going to stay that one tenant, and then it was eventually going to be converted to all of storage. When we approved that, did that mean that it was no longer approved for the use it was being used for the remainder of that lease? In other words, did that get biased a little bit? Did we, or is that the way it usually works? Because I don't remember that being a topic.
Right, they were coming in just as self-storage.
Self-storage, yeah.
So did we expect, or was the expectation that that would just convert to self-storage after we approved it?
Yes.
And we didn't really contemplate that there would be a tenant there for a period of time.
A lot of things happened after the fact.
But it sounds like that tenant that was there was not a manufacturing use.
Right, it was a
So,
permitted
it
use,
was a
but,
permitted use,
so
right.
it was still allowed.
Yeah.
It was allowed to be there.
Right.
Okay, yeah, that
I had the
clears
same
that for me.
confusion, yeah.
It's just confusion, it's not, I'm not questioning anybody. I just want to understand it. Thank you.
Okay,
You're right there.
all right. Any other questions before I close the hearing? Okay, at this time, I'm going to close the hearing, move into the public meeting. So we've got, I'll just remind people, there's two things here, a conditional special use, or a conditional use permit, and then a site plan. So if you're entertaining motions or discussions, you can address each one separately. So, any discussion? Anybody have any other things they want to talk about on it? No? Okay. Anybody wanna-
I don't see any harm in not approving this the way it's applied for. It seems reasonable to me.
Okay, anybody want to make a motion? We'll take the conditional use permit first, number 4. Anyone? Ed?
Okay, I'll relieve Varley. Let me put my name down first. New business, 4, conditional use permit, 131 Burke Street. Finding that it does meet NRO section 190, 133F with no stipulations.
Okay, so we have a motion for the conditional use permit to make the determination that it does meet the requirements. Any second on that? Second by Mr. Rapucci. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None, motion passes. How about with regard to site plan, new business number 5?
Yeah, I'll make a motion also.
Go ahead, Ed.
New business number 5, site plan 131 Burke Street LLC. Finding that the site plan meets 190, 146D. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 as written. Number 2, the request for waiver NRO 190, 198, which requires minimum number of parking spaces, is granted, and finding the waiver will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation.
Okay, so we have a motion that the plan does meet NRO 190-146D with the 7 stipulations and the approved waiver. Does anybody want to make a second on that? Second by Mr. Varley. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Motion passes. Okay, thanks. All right. So we have on our agenda, the next up would be new business site plan number 6, Amherst Street Dental Holdings LLC, application and acceptance of proposed site plan amendment to allow use of medical office building properties located at 491 Amherst Street. Can I take a motion that this plan is ready for jurisdiction?
I'll make that motion.
We ask them to,
We'll give him a second. Any second on that?
I'm sorry, who made the motion?
Made the motion.
Mr. Rapucci.
Thank you.
Second by Mr. Varley. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. Is someone here from the applicant?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Excuse my slowness with the board. My name is Christopher Berry. I'm with Berry Surveying and Engineering. Our office is over a little closer to the seacoast, and one of our clients has asked us to come to Nashua. I've never done any business here before, so thank you for having us.
Could you just give your office address?
What's
The
that?
address of your office, could you just?
It's 335 Second Crown Point Road in Barrington, New Hampshire.
All right, thanks.
So we're here representing the dentist, Amherst Dental, and the property location is 491 Amherst Street here in Nashua. And the applicants have been renovating over time the structure that's located in this location, and their tenants come in and out, and they renovate. It's currently occupied as office space. So they'll renovate offices, and the use has never really changed over the years. In 1977, a site plan was approved for this project site to allow for the expansion of the back building and the parking array that's seen on the project site. And oddly enough, at that time, there was a note that was placed on the plan that said that there's no medical office that would be permitted at this project site. Oddly enough, the dentist purchased this site and has had office tenants there. Now he'd like to move his medical practice there, and similar to the prior applicant, goes to pull a building permit and was told this use is not allowed per the site plan that you have on record. And so they called us. They asked us to, quote, revise the site plan. And of course, this was a hand-drawn 1977 site plan from a land surveyor civil engineer that is no longer around. So we traveled over. We conducted a meeting with your planning staff to determine how we should proceed. And it was determined that we put together basically an existing conditions plan and note all the square footage of uses that are on site and request the change of use from office space to medical office space. This is a use that is now allowed in this zone. There's ample parking on site. And so literally the front bottom half of the front building, approximately 3,800 square feet. So it'd be this area here, which was used prior as office space. I'll move the mouse again for those of you that were trying to see. Would now be used as medical office space. So we prepared a really basic plan set, a site plan that shows all of the actual elements of the site, a topographic plan that shows topographic elements on the site, a cover plan, and then a neighborhood plan to put this in a little bit of context for you. We have worked out a couple of details with your planning staff, who's exceptionally helpful, by the way, compared to a few of the towns we work in. And a few of those conditions are, there's an existing dumpster that's on site. It's not shown on the site plan. It is to be shown on the site plan, and it currently is not on a concrete pad, and it's not surrounded with any sort of fencing or screening. And the applicants are aware of that and have agreed to take care of that as part of a revised site plan approval. And we understand that in this zone, given the traffic on Amherst Street and the connectivity desirability between the abutting similar commercial land uses, proximity of the northern parcel to the actual intersection, the applicant has agreed to work with planning staff to put together what I call an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, that would allow any of the abutting users to utilize this site for an easement purpose for access, and we would work with those applicants as they come forward to ensure that that access takes place. So currently, we're not offering a physical easement because really we would just be blanketing the entire site with an easement. That's not what we would like to do, but we would offer up a written document in the form of an MOU that says that when an applicant comes forward, an abutting applicant, we would work with them to the best of our ability at no additional fee to provide them easement access as appropriate. So with that, I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you might have on this application.
Questions? Anybody? Ed?
The wooden fence in the back, it's kind of needs to be repaired and completed. Are you
Okay.
guys planning on doing anything with the wooden fence?
I don't know that there's a plan in place at the moment. If that's something that the board has consistently asked applicants to do, the doctor is committed to improving the site, so we'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. There's a driveway that's right next to it, and I'd like Steve, if he's better at addressing that. There's an exit out of the car wash, and then there's an entrance. Actually, both of them are showing exiting driveways, entrance and
Existing.
yeah,
not
existing.
exiting.
Thank you. So I think Steve Ducraine, I'd like him to address that with you better than I would. Because it's so close. Is there a problem? It has
Yeah.
been before.
He's asking me, not you.
I thought he was asking you, sir.
Okay, yeah, no, the street that's busy like that, you would like to have more control over your curb cuts, but these are existing conditions that have been there for a long time, and if there are opportunities to improve them, we will, but the good thing about this side is you enter on one side and you leave on the other.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
So that's a better situation.
Right.
In my view.
Yeah.
But while we're on that, I know the site needs a lot of maintenance, and I think work started on the building.
Yes, sir.
But the site itself, that entrance driveway, I had some business there in the wintertime, and there was a large pothole quite close to the main road, Amos Street. And today that pothole is still there. And why there's a problem, I think, it's like, if a car is slowing down to go over that pothole, the car behind
Right.
is sticking out in the street.
Mhm.
And that's something I think you should address, sooner than later.
I don't, again, the applicant, he's done quite a bit to the front of the building, gave the building quite a facelift over the last couple of years. I don't think that the applicant would have a problem with providing some additional asphalt in that area. Yeah. I noticed that, I did a site walk a week and a half ago, and I noticed that also. And I drive a little Volkswagen. I actually, when I pulled in,
Yeah.
felt it hit the rim, so that's understandable. We do a lot of traffic design, and you're right, as somebody's trying to pull in and avoid that, you actually could create crashes behind you. So it's a great observation.
Mr. Rapucci?
So, in 1977, medical and dental offices were not allowed on that property? They were not allowed by right?
I don't know that they were not allowed by right, but there was a specific note put on the site plan for some reason that said that medical office is not permitted. So I don't know if it was a competition, between business owners. I'm not sure what the genesis of that was. Linda and I scratched our heads over it, and we really couldn't find a reason for it, so that's why we're here tonight.
Was it permitted at that time?
I think it was a permitted use. I actually went back and looked at the minutes to see if it stated in there why this note was added, but unfortunately it didn't.
Doesn't.
And our files don't go back that far.
Roger must remember, you were here, right?
Not 1977, Steve. 1989.
Any other questions with the applicant, Mr. Peterson?
Do you think the dentist office will produce any biological waste coming out of there? Blood products, old teeth, that kind of thing?
To be honest, I wouldn't think so, and I believe that through the building permit process, that type of stuff is typically vetted. I don't have the specific answer for that.
Anything else?
I just have one thing for staff.
Okay, go ahead.
In what the applicant said, I was gonna add a fourth stipulation, site work as requested shall be corrected prior to CFO. Is that something that we
Well,
could put in that way?
We're not really gonna be doing I mean, I can go out there and check the dumpsters, I can do a CO if you wanna add that the fence will be, repaired.
Yeah, just the repair stuff like we requested.
Yep.
Prior
The,
to CFO. That's be the
pothole
last
and-
date, the last
Yep,
thing that we'd be
Pothole
doing.
and the fence will be repaired prior to CO.
Yeah, CFO.
If applicant's required to maintain their site plan at all times, so that could be an enforcement issue if they don't do that.
So would we need it or don't need it?
It doesn't hurt to put it in. We'll check it when we review it, and that way we know it
It's a
gets
good
done.
reminder.
Okay.
So you would call it CO or CFO?
CFO.
You call it a CO.
Certificate of occupancy.
That's how I called it. Certificate of occupancy.
Any other questions? No? Okay, all right. There's no one in the audience, so I'm not gonna ask if there's anybody out there. So I think we're all set with you, so.
Thank you.
At this point, we'll close the hearing, take us into the public meeting. Pretty straightforward. Just trying to get the uses squared away here. Ed talked about maybe a fourth stipulation dealing with repairing a fence and the pothole on the entrance. The dumpster's already covered, it looks like, on stipulation number 3, so. Anybody willing to make a motion? Ed?
Since I wrote it,
Joe?
just to help you out, so I already wrote it, so. New business 6, site plan, 491 Amherst Street. Let me see. There's an attached city ordinance, 190-209F, which requires connectivity as requested. The site plan meets NRO 190-146D, with the first being a waiver, NRO 190-279EE, which is granted, and finding that it will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. 2 and 3 as written, and 4, site work as requested shall be corrected prior to CFO.
Can you be specific on the site work? I think there was like 2 particular items, right?
Pothole
Pothole in the fence.
Pothole in the fence, instead of site work, pothole at the entrance and the wooden fence and the rear of the building.
Okay, so we have a motion, Mr. Weber to approve, since the plan meets NRO 190-146D with the 4 stipulations, the first one being the waiver as is granted and will not be contrary. Anybody have a second on that? Second by Mr. Rapucci. Any discussion? No? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thanks. We're all set. Yeah. Okay, so, going down the list here, so, new business site plan number 7, that's postponed to November 15th.
No surprise.
Yeah, other business, case number 1, review of tentative agenda. Has anybody had a chance to look at the tentative agenda?
Did we have, oh, here, take it right here,
Linda, do they need to extend this based on case 7?
No,
I'm sorry, what?
Do they need to extend or table this?
They haven't taken jurisdiction of it yet.
Make a motion to the tentative agenda.
Sorry.
There's no items that have.
He just in his letters.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Rapucci that there are no items of regional impact on the tentative agenda. We have a second. Second by Mr. Peterson. Any discussion? Nope. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Anybody else have any discussion items? Roger, did you have anything? No?
I have one.
Ed?
The notice, sidewalk training workshop, I would request that, he asked if we would add anything. And it's been, I don't know how we can go about this, but I've requested, whenever we have a residential site plan, that anything engineering comes through, and there's no way to be checking it. And I want to have, I've talked with one engineer. He said it would be best if we talked with someone that has experience in what it's going to take. And mostly, the engineered, like a retaining wall is a structure, it's permitted, it's checked. But blankets, erosion blankets, or anything that's not really checked can be put in, but it doesn't mean it's going to be put in right. And I don't want to have a very expensive thing for an applicant to come in and all of a sudden they have to find out that I want something that we can really be informed as to the right way to do it. So I want
Talking
that.
an affidavit from an engineer?
Well, see, the engineer comes in and he stamps it. Anything, blanket, whatever, he stamps it.
Right.
Then that applicant, 4 years down the road, if it gets built, now they have to have somebody that's knowledgeable that's gonna do it, but there's nobody that's checking it. And the engineer, I actually talked to Petropoulos, and he was saying the worst thing that happens with those is they put a fence right through the erosion blanket, and now it's not any good. Okay, so there has to be a way to have it checked, and I asked the building department on that issue, and they said, you need to have a third party, because there's nobody that we don't have that expertise. They need to have a third party, but that can be expensive. So I wanna see if there's another way to do it better than that.
Is this one particular thing you're talking about, or is it a
Any
multiple?
engineering.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about construction administration services, right? So, I mean, you can buy that from engineering. I mean, I'm an engineer, I provide that service on all my projects.
Right, but somebody has to pay for it.
Right, but it's not a requirement of our city ordinances or the state codes or anything for
Exactly.
that to happen. So I don't think that's a planning board thing, that's more of a.
Well, we have to,
Yeah.
what it is
Yeah.
we're trying to,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do is protect the homeowner that comes in and buys that
Right.
stuff.
Is this
I'm
the
trying to protect the next-door neighbor that has this
Yeah.
thing that, their erosion up here, and they don't put it in right, now all of their property starts eroding down into this person.
So the way it works, like in Mass, okay, so, or a lot, let's take Hanover, New Hampshire, right? So Hanover, New Hampshire it requires an affidavit from the engineer. In order to do that affidavit, you have to inspect the site yourself, because you're stamping off that you're doing.
I'm asking.
But that's a city ordinance.
Okay, so if that's what we need, I'd like to have.
Is this the same
We
idea
wouldn't do it in
as?
here, you'd have to do it with the alderman, right?
Is it-
Exactly, that's fine, that's fine, I just want an
Yeah.
answer to it.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear.
That works. Other cities have that. I have to do that in Hanover. I have to do it in every municipality in Mass. There's quite a few but it depends on the kind of project, too.
Is this the same idea as what Steve was talking about the roads that there needs? Is this the same principle?
I think what Ed is talking about, there are specific items that would need special expertise
Right.
to certify that it's built per design,
Plan.
per
Yeah.
standard.
Right. But I have been looking into what you had brought up and my own, and just reading things. I don't think we need an ordinance as a planning board to set that as a requirement if we see fit. I don't think it has to be mandated by the alderman. I think our board can make that determination and do it. If the way I read it, if we see it as a need to protect the interests of the city, we can do it. And we can specify that the applicant has to hire somebody. We could even specify that the city will hire somebody and the applicant has to pay for it. And I don't think we need an ordinance to do it. I think we can just do it, if that's what our board decides is
Well, the reason that I'm
reasonable
doing it is I
requirement.
don't want the applicant to come in, and then all of a sudden, ba-boom.
I completely understand what you want to do. I'm just saying, I think that we have the power to do that,
Yeah.
just because we think it's important, without getting an ordinance to say we can do that. I think the RSA says we can do that, is
Yeah,
all
I
I'm saying.
agree, but if we can have it as an ordinance, then the person coming into, the applicant comes into staff and says, okay, I want to do this, this, and this. And now, he already knows that he has to have an affidavit. He doesn't come to all this money come in, and all of a sudden, now he has to have an affidavit. I think the right way to go is to have one of our aldermen here that comes to and talk with them about it. That's what I'm saying. I think we should look at that, so it's pre-done before we even get here.
I certainly don't disagree with the idea that the alderman could do that. But all I'm saying is, as a board, we could decide, especially as applied to what was, because I spent a long time thinking about what Steve was saying about how we're getting roads that aren't built to our spec and they're getting delivered to the city, right? And they're not up to standard. And I was reading that stuff and I'm like, we can require that. We can just have a policy that the planning department can reflect to any applicant that the planning board in Nashua is gonna require this level of supervision or maintenance and at a professional level, and the expense is gonna be passed on to you. I don't think we need an ordinance to do it. I'm not saying an ordinance is a bad idea. It's hard to get an ordinance passed.
Yeah.
You know, there's 15 aldermen, and you gotta have, that's not always an easy thing to do. I think we have the authority just to do it.
We do, I agree, we do
So-
have that. I've already asked building department, and they said, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the process you'd want to do is just be a construction control affidavit, you know, at the end of the,
So is there,
So-
who has it now, would you say?
I mean, every municipality in the state of Massachusetts has it, you
Right,
know.
anything in New Hampshire?
You said Hanover.
Hanover does, yeah, Hanover does. Or Lebanon has it. But it's the building department, it's the building inspector that requires it. So it's not the planning board that requires it in any of the towns that do it, it's actually the building department.
Lebanon.
So you need it as part of the certificate of occupancy, that you gotta hand over a construction control affidavit. You know, the inspector collects it before. So, you know, I think before anybody goes down that path, you probably wanna sit down with the building inspector a little bit and talk about it and.
Oh, yeah,
you
yeah,
know, go
I
down
just
that
wanna
road,
have some
so.
background,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, it's done on bigger projects anyway, cause we
Yes,
do it to
right, I'm
protect our
talking
own
about residential.
liability per
That's the only
se.
thing I'm talking about, residential.
Yeah, but there is a cost to the homeowner for that,
Yes,
the engineering cost.
Right.
So, because what it means is the engineer's coming back to check the construction and then sign off on it, and we don't do anything for free, so.
right, yeah, no. I just don't want a surprise for the individual, and we've had that problem. All of a sudden, this guy comes in,
Yeah.
and we mandate that he do this, and now it's out of
Yeah.
pocket. It's like, oh, man, that's gonna be another 12,000, I don't know, I'm just saying crazy figure. Just no surprises, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what the implementation of that kind of policy would be. It'd probably have to be advertised, and you'd have to.
Well, if you
get
adopt
the-
an ordinance, I think that takes the surprise out of it, so a homeowner or a developer or builder, whoever's doing the work, knows that that's gonna be required. It may not necessarily be required in every case. If it's you know, usually where you need special inspections is when you have slopes or you have special other conditions of a property that might require a professional engineer to come
Right.
back in to say that this design that was completed, that you approved, was built according to the design.
Right.
And, you know, there's a lot that goes on in a construction project. It doesn't always get built the way it was designed, and so you need someone there to inspect it when it's built.
Yeah. And one of the
Or
things-
someone that can look at something after the fact and say, yes, this was built pursuant to the approved design.
Yeah, one of the, also not just that one is, we recently had a bunch of houses that were built on this grade, and at the bottom, we had this capture area, and then after that, the swell went, the egress water came out, and it was down over by the other landowner, and it was gonna go right in his property. All of that could be built, but it may not be built correctly, and so that's why it's important to have like an affidavit right there that it's built correctly. So it does happen, it does come up when we have.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an uncommon thing. I mean,
Yeah, so,
every project I do has one.
appreciate your input there, thank you.
You know, but I don't do residential work either, so.
And that's a situation I think the board really, like Jerry said, is very capable of just putting that as a condition. I think you should expect that if you're gonna be doing some creative retention facilities on a steep slope, that we wanna make sure that that is correctly constructed and meets the grades. That's not something necessarily that Steve's office would look at on, you know, private property, since that's, in that particular case, that was on private property.
Yeah.
I think it's true. When the risks are high, when the concerns are very high, I think that's when you can put in that condition. It also depends on staffing too. There are times when, say, private development is slow, and you have extra staff, whether it's the building inspector staff or engineering inspector staff, and they can make themselves available for a lot of work. When things are busy, then they're not. So in those cases, you want to make sure things don't slip through the cracks, and you ask for the applicant to, assure us that things are being built as expected.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the ones that I'm used to seeing, they have, it's very specific wording though, and it does, it's kind of the same, like, all the time, so they know what level of construction control you gotta provide, so. But,
Okay, I'll try to do my homework and then
yeah, I mean,
I can talk with David.
If you want to.
I can send you like 100 examples of them, you know? Yeah.
Well, it's the ordinance, I want to see, like, Hanover's ordinance, that's
I don't know what, I'm not.
Lebanon.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the ordinance, whether they have an ordinance or what it looks like, it's just their building department requires it before you
I'll go to the
get
building
involved.
department first, so I'll get
Yeah.
I'll go see him.
I can show you what the affidavit looks like. But, I mean, for, a single lot, it's gonna be more than $1,000, It's not gonna be like $100, just so you know.
I know, and that's the importance of knowing it ahead of time.
Yeah, right, yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
We
I
don't
mean,
need anybody's
yeah.
permission to do that. We can do it if we deem it necessary and the RSA gives us the authority to do it.
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I've already talked to legal, and they said,
Mm-hmm.
you have no problem doing it.
Do you want to bring that up, your discussion in July then?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I could
You
bring
wanna-
in,
If you have some.
I can bring in
ordinance,
some
Yeah,
typical affidavits, because it'd
I'll
be
see if
good
I
if
can
we're
bring
gonna
in-
use a stipulation that it's relatively consistent.
if you want to email those to us first, and we'll try to do some research if we can, and then we can email them out or put them for your meeting on the 19th.
Yep.
Or put them in your packet for the next meeting, maybe.
Yeah, I can show you a couple examples of what they look like.
That way it gives everyone a chance to look at some in advance, so you aren't caught cold at
Yeah.
a discussion item. I think it's wise for everyone to have time to think about it.
Yep.
I'll
Okay.
talk with David to make sure he knows
Any
what
other
I'm looking at, too.
All right.
I think so.
Good to go? Anybody wanna make a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we're adjourned at 9:46.
It's been an oven in here for 3 hours.